Macleod Distillers has been around in the Scotch whisky business for over 80 years. But what's really significant about Ian Macleod Distillers is they weren't a producer of Scotch whisky until 2003 when they bought Glengoyne. Beautifully balanced, nice bit of bourbon maturation in there, which is pretty rare for Glengoyne. Sherry casks as well. Zesty, alive, fresh, vibrant, beautiful.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Discover series with the Whisky Advisor. This week we're off to one of the prettiest distilleries in Scotland, and we're going to be discovering all things Glengoyne with International Brand Ambassador Gordon Dundas. Hey Gordon, how are you? Welcome to the series.
I'm very well. Great to be here speaking with you. Very excited. Fantastic.
Such a pleasure to have you here. But just before we jump into it, guys, please like, subscribe, and hit the little bell so you know every time we have another wonderful video like this. So Gordon, what do you have in your glass today?
I have a Glengoyne 12-year-old, one of my favorite of the Glengoyne range. Beautifully balanced, nice bit of bourbon maturation in there, which is pretty rare for Glengoyne. Sherry casks as well. Zesty, alive, fresh, vibrant, beautiful.
Lovely. That's exactly what I have in my glass as well. So, Slanger.
Slanger. Oh, beautiful. Fantastic.
Oh, lovely. It's a nice afternoon dram for me right there.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Gordon, over the course of your career, you've organized some of the world's biggest whiskey festivals, represented some phenomenal single malt brands, and you've also been appointed a keeper of the Quake, all in a whirlwind 15-year career. Could you tell us a little more about your journey?
Yeah, look, I mean, like all things, I sort of started working for Whiskey Magazine, which developed into working for Whiskey Live, which we know have been in India and all over the world. And I was involved in setting up those, which was instrumental in understanding the industry and meeting lots of people. So that was really good. Then I went to work for Morrison Bowmore Distillers, which at that point was the wonderful brand that is Bowmore, Auchentoshan, and Glengarry single malts, and taking them to the world. And then laterally, that became Beam Suntory, a much bigger company, where I was in charge of the travel retail whiskies. And then I moved on to Ian Macleod Distillers in Glengoyne and Tamdhu and Rosebank and Smokehead and all those wonderful brands. So it's been a heck of a journey. And to be a keeper of the Quake, absolutely amazing. Very, very proud to be a keeper of the Quake.
Lovely. I'm going to ask you about the other Ian Macleod brands towards the end, but just to segue a little bit, let's do something a little fun. Are you ready for a rapid fire round?
I'm ready for a rapid fire round. Yeah.
Lovely. What is your first whiskey?
My first whiskey, good question. It was at university. It was a Glenfarclas 105, so quite a strong whiskey. But actually, the guy that I was with, I didn't know a lot about whiskey. He added some water to me, and that was where I sort of got hooked. I could see the difference, understood that you could add water, and from that point, enjoyed whiskey.
Oh, lovely. That's a cracker of a whiskey to start with. What's your favorite bar in the whole world?
Oh, there's a few. I mean, I like going for a whiskey in a couple of the bars in my local Glasgow here, the Bon Accord or the Pot Still. There's a great bar in Chicago that's run by a friend of mine called Delilah's, but also there's a few bars in Asia that I really like as well. Backyard in Taiwan, a couple in Australia as well. So I don't have one favorite bar, but there's so many good whiskey bars.
And it's quite a few to add to our list right there. What's your favorite food?
Oh, I think I love Asian food. I lived in Taiwan for a year. I think one of the things I really love is something called a xiaolongbao. For those who, it's a wonderful type of food. It's a sort of pork soup dumpling. I'm a huge fan of them, and I really miss them. So yeah, maybe that.
Mm-hmm. I've had that in quite a few places, including Din Tai Fung. So
Yeah, Din Tai Fung, absolutely fantastic. They're so tasty.
Lovely. What's your favorite sport?
Good question. I've got three main sports that I think I really like. Rugby, which maybe isn't particularly popular in that many countries, but I'm a big rugby fan. I love skiing and haven't been able to go skiing this year. And I'm a big sailor. I've been a sailor for many years. I enjoy sailing. So recently I've been watching the America's Cup, which has been on in New Zealand. So those are my three main sports.
Lovely. Believe it or not, I think India has a rugby team, which I discovered
I
recently.
think
I'm
it
not
does.
sure
Yeah,
where
I
they
think you're
play,
right.
but mhm,
They're
lovely.
getting better. They're getting better.
So, cats or dogs for you?
Oh, dogs all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, dogs.
Books or music?
Music. I'm not a big reader. So more music than books, I think. I wish I did read more, but nah, music.
Likewise. Beaches or mountains?
Mountains, certainly ones with snow on them. I'm not really built for the beach. My skin is quite fair. I need to put on a lot of sunscreen, so mountains for sure.
Uh-huh. Coffee or tea?
Interestingly, coffee, although coffee, but I do like green tea from my time in Asia. So if there is a tea, it would be green tea, but coffee mainly, yeah.
Mhm. Batman or Superman?
Oh, neither really. I'm not a big
Okay.
superhero fan. Probably Batman, given the choice.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Uh,
okay.
all right. So, just to close out, what is your favorite whiskey memory of all time?
I have. I've been very lucky to have gone on tours around distilleries at odd times of the year. I think probably one of my best memories was. Oh, it's tough. I think my first time going to Tamdhu and our other distillery, sampling some wonderful sherry casks, was absolutely incredible. I think from Glengoyne, just that was my first distillery visit. So you always remember your first distillery visit. So Glengoyne stands out for me there. I think another one, just to summarize, would be I did a tasting with Rachel Barry and one or two others in the warehouse at Bowmore, where we tasted black, white, and gold Bowmore from the trilogy. 1964 whiskies, absolutely incredible. So there's a few others, but those three stand out.
Those are all fantastic memories. Getting to
Yeah,
do that in the warehouse at Bomo, oh, lovely.
yeah, it was
No,
lovely.
that's
Yeah,
a dream for most.
it was. It was incredible. Yeah, it was amazing.
Mhm. But just coming back to Glengoyne for a minute.
Mm,
So
yeah.
it's not a very commonly known single malt brand in India. And I believe
Mm-hmm,
even in Scotland, it's really risen to prominence in the past couple of
mm,
decades.
mm.
Could you give us a little more history of the brand? And
Sure.
also, could you tell us about Ian Macleod Distillers?
Sure. Well, they sort of go hand in hand. Ian Macleod Distillers has been around in the Scotch whisky business for over 80 years. But what's really significant about Ian Macleod Distillers is they weren't a producer of Scotch whisky until 2003 when they bought Glengoyne from the Edrington Group. So, they were brokers and they were blenders and they were bottlers and they were everything within that whiskey industry before being a producer. So they'd been really had a history within the center of the industry of all that whiskey moving around the industry. Um, Bought Glengoyne in 2003, which really you know said we're now a producer, and so our history from that point onwards was to grow the brand of Glengoyne as a single malt, and then they purchased Tamdhu in 2011, and then Rosebank in the last couple of years. So they've now gone from no distilleries to quite a lot of distilleries in a small period of time, and it's a real step change for Ian Macleod. Glengoyne, obviously, history. It's not the biggest brand in the world. It's not the biggest distillery in the world. It only produces 1 million liters. So we don't have lots and lots of stock. We'll never be a supermarket brand. We're a specialist retail brand. And we're really, that's where Glengoyne is very, very different. But what we really notice is when people drink Glengoyne and they taste it for the first time, they absolutely love it. And it delivers something, I think, because we're a family business, because we produce our whiskey in a different way, no financial pressures on our production. And that's why I think Ian Macleod and Glengoyne work hand in hand together.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing. And I believe that Glengoyne is located very interestingly as well. Could you tell
It
us a little
does
bit
have a
about that?
it does have a very unique location. Firstly, the name means Valley of the Wild Geese, which in that part of Scotland, which is just north of Glasgow, between Glasgow and Loch Lomond, a lot of geese do go through there in their migration. So that's why it's called Glengoyne. It is located on a road. The distillery is right on the road, and the warehouses are south of the road. The road is the dividing line between the highland and the lowland region. So obviously an old tax line. So it's right on the lower limit of the highland region, still a highland whiskey. If you walk across the road into the warehouses, you're technically in the lowlands. So a very unique location. I don't think any other distillery in Scotland does that.
It's the first time I've heard of anything like that, to be
Yeah.
honest. But talking about the name, so I was looking at the box as well. I love the new branding that you've got.
Yeah.
I've got the old 18 as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's quite a change in branding. But one thing that I noticed the most was the 3 points here about the
Mm,
barley, the slow stills, and also
mm,
6 years to prepare your casks. I thought that was
yeah.
very interesting. Could you tell us a little more about that, please?
Yeah, well, just one thing to start off with the packaging. If you look at the 18 compared to the new box there, the key point is with the new packaging is that's 100% recyclable. The 18-year-old tin is not, and that is why we've moved to 100% recyclable packaging from
Okay,
all of our products up to 21 years old. So that was one of the reasons
lovely.
Glengoyne is a very sustainable distillery. So in terms of how we produce our whiskey, we're very sustainable. So in terms of the 3 points that you've spoken about, we the location of Glengoyne means it's never been peated. It's never been a whiskey that has been peated. So we only use air to dry our barley. So you'll never see a peated Glengoyne. That's because historically that's always been the style. Um, the distillation is very slow. If we look at the flavor influence of distillation, we know how important that is, but the temperatures of that distillation are really important as well as the still shapes. So we hold the temperatures at the boiling point of alcohol, which is 78.3 degrees C, and we allow that really slow reflux to happen, and we collect our spirit over a long period of time in sort of 4 hours or so is our spirit run, which is pretty long for a distillery. And finally, our sherry casks, which we use in all of our products, come from Spain, and there's a 6-year production process for those sherry casks, from a tree being cut down in Spain to a cask arriving at Glengoyne to be used for maturation. So there really is no cost cutting. There really is no, sustainability runs through everything that we do as well, and it's an amazing way of making whiskey.
Lovely. So could you tell us a little more about how that comes into your classic Glengoyne profile and a little more about the range as well?
Sure. Well, every Glengoyne starts off with that fruity new make that really comes from a clear wort, a yeast that helps generate a real fruity beer, and then distillation, which really supplements that in terms of temperatures and slow distillation. So our new make is very fruity, and you then see that green fruitiness in our 10 and our 12. Our 10-year-old matured in first fill sherry casks, about 30% first fill sherry casks. The 12-year-old, we actually use a bit of bourbon, which is why this has a light, sort of fresher style. And then we have a cask strength, which is really showing the power of Glengoyne at high strength. The 18-year-old, which you have there, has much more sherry cask first fills. So both European and American oak starting to show that richer style of Glengoyne, leading into the 21, the 25, the 30, and onto the 50, which we now have, which all have a very big and strong influence of sherry casks. So sherry casks are instrumental to Glengoyne's style.
Mhm. I look forward to doing a side-by-side comparison of the 12 to 18 once we're done.
Very different whiskies. Yeah, both beautiful in their own right, but very different.
I use the 18 as kind of an after-dinner whiskey when I'm feeling a
Yeah,
little more luxurious. Yeah.
the 18 is it's got very different flavors. It has a little bit of stewed fruits. It has a little bit of maltiness, a bit of cinnamon spiciness. It's a beautiful, beautiful whiskey. My
hmm
favorite Glengoyne, actually.
The 18, oh, lovely.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah.
hmm over the course of a conversation, you mentioned Rosebank and Tamdhu.
Mm.
Uh, Rosebank is, I can see the
I
bottle
have a
right
wee
up there.
Rosebank behind me. Yeah.
And that's been really making waves recently. A lot of people have waited many, many years for that. Could you tell us a little more about the Rosebank revival, as well as the other two brands you have, the Tamdhu
Sure.
Distillery and Smokehead?
Well, let's start with Tamdhu as the next distillery that we purchased as a business in 2011. Tamdhu, up on Speyside, not far from Cardew and Nokandu, a very big distillery, 4 million liters. So that helps us with our many other brands that we work with in terms of blends and other things. Our owner Leonard decided he wanted to make a whiskey that was only sherry casks. So you can see here, for example, that we use this is an American oak sherry cask, the single cask whiskey that we've produced. Beautiful bottle celebrating the Victorian era. And one of the really building its credentials as a sherry cask, fully matured whiskey from start to finish. Natural color, of course, as Glengoyne is, and a beautiful whiskey that's still very unknown, but is building its real credentials. So this is one to watch. I'm a real big fan of this distillery. Um, Smokehead is another whiskey that was created, really. It's a single malt from Islay. We don't have an Islay single malt distillery, so it's whiskey that we have in our stocks relating to that old Ian Macleod business. And we created a brand that's very different, very sharp, very, if you look at this tin of Smokehead that I have here, look, I mean, it's got a skull. It's not looking like a standard Islay single malt. It's talking to you in a different way. And I really like the way this brand works. And it's really saying, if you like smoky whiskey, come and drink me. And if you don't, fine, go and drink something else. So not for everyone, but a great, great whiskey. And finally, Rosebank, which is our distillery, which you can see up here. We've purchased from Diageo, along with all the remaining stocks of this wonderful lowland distillery, triple distilled with worm tubs, which is a very odd sort of combination, but I think one of the reasons why Rosebank is so popular. And this bottle here is the 30-year-old that we released about 3 or 4 months ago around the world, and has proved so popular. I think people are so happy to see Rosebank releasing some whiskies. We will not have the distillery is currently being built. I think we're probably looking at about the middle of next year before we start producing spirit, and maybe another 8 years before we have a single malt. So we have to, all the remaining stocks that we have to use over that period. So exciting times for Ian Macleod.
I'm looking forward to tasting that Rosebank, although I'm sure it's quite scarce right now.
It is a little scarce. I'm very lucky to have a bottle, and I've got a little sample bottle that I use for my tastings that I've been doing around the world. So yeah, I mean the demand for that whiskey has been off the charts, which is great.
Wonderful. It's so great that you could share so much about all these brands with us, Gordon. Thank you so much for being here. And guys, what I'm going to do is, as always, I'm going to put the details on how to get in touch with Gordon, as well as more about the brands down in the description. But also this one YouTube video that Gordon shared with me about how the sherry casks come from Spain all the way to Speyside. And I believe it applies to both Tamdhu and Glengoyne. I thought it was a fascinating video and it's great learning. So I'm going to post it up here. Please watch out for that. So Gordon, thank you. And anything you'd like to share with us before we head out?
No, it's been a pleasure. Anybody got any questions on any of the Ian Macleod brands or any of the information that I've talked about? I'm on Facebook. You can get a hold of me. You can get in touch with me. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
Oh, the pleasure is ours, as always, Gordon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Slanja.
Slanja. So guys, that was a great conversation with Gordon. So much covered. We talked about Glengoyne, Rosebank, Tamdhu, and Smokehead, but definitely check out that video about the casks because it's absolutely fabulous. Great learning right there. But until next week, please like, subscribe, and hit the little bell so you'll know every time we have a new video on here. Until next time, cheers, guys.